But my big thing in terms of advice is to just have people like just stop preparing months. Start the business. It's not going to turn out the way that you want it to, almost certainly. Whether that means you need to make a small pivot or the business wasn't meant to be, there's something that's not going to work out the way that you're expecting it to. So I think the important part is to just start, and you'll learn as you go and adapt as you go and pivot as you go. And I think that's really the most effective way to learn.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that has built several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today we have another great guest on the episode, Carson Hunt. And Carson is now, or started out originally, giving you a bit of his backstory, was a computer engineer major, loved tech and gaming. And then while he was, I think, in high school, he actually started a clothing company with his sorority or fraternity brother. I never remember the difference between sorority and fraternity, but one of those. And they liked the idea. They started to build a company, did a great job on the apparel and building it, and they ended up in reinvesting a lot of their money into tech and built the company. And they found that their biggest, as they continue to grow the company, their biggest asset was actually the technology as opposed to the apparel. And so they've kind of now made that adjustment or switched that gear to really focus more on the technology side of the apparel company and the clothing company as opposed to the apparel itself. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Carson.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I gave maybe a brief introduction, but maybe take us back in time a bit and kind of tell us, this started, I think you said in high school, and how, or high school or college, and I can't remember which it is, but tell us kind of how things got going and the journey that led you up to where you're at today.
I met my co-founder in high school. We went our separate ways. He went to Indiana University. I went to the University of Central Florida. And we stayed in contact. As you mentioned, we would occasionally game together. And he was in a fraternity up in Indiana, and I saw that he was making some good money selling apparel to the different fraternities and sororities across his campus. I gave him a call. I said, "Hey, look, I'd be happy to join forces with you and see what we can make of this. If not, cool. I'll just do what you're doing with all of our friends here in Florida." So luckily, it was a good team to build out right in the beginning, and we joined forces and started just making apparel for fraternities and campuses, North Carolina, Indiana.
Let me jump in so 2 questions that are just popped in my mind right off. So one is, was this starting out as, hey, I want to do a startup and this is a business so I think I can continue after school, or is this, hey, this will be some great money that I can make while I'm earning my degree or my major?
As nice as it would be to say that it started off as this crazy, startup idea, it was just, hey, this is some cool money we can make on the side.
No, and that's what the genesis of a lot of great businesses. So, even almost you go back to now the Amazon, or at least the myth or the legend of Amazon, whether or not that's always true or not, of him shipping it out of the dorm room and delivering them and doing all that, and whether or not that's true, it always seems like there's some good myths that go along with businesses. So now I'm going to ask the second question. So you had your buddy that you knew from high school, you guys had parted ways, you were at different universities, and you call him up and say, "Hey, I love what you're doing. I think it looks like you're making great money." Now I could either be your best friend or your worst competitor. Which do you want? So how did that conversation go? Was it pretty friendly? Was it a good conversation? Or was it, well, I guess I have no other choice. We'll partner up and go together and just take it off from there. Kind of how did that conversation go? Because I could see it going either way.
Yeah. So luckily my co-founder is super, relaxed and understanding of that kind of stuff. Reached out and chatted with him, super friendly conversation. And didn't go too competitive or not. We just, as soon as we laid it out, we set up that partnership and we were off to the races.
And now, what was the part or the funny story that I missed that was about high school?
Yeah. So funny enough, when you mentioned Amazon, Amazon's kind of a local legend at our high school, because it's the same high school that Jeff Bezos went to. So everyone's always talking about Amazon, which I thought was kind of funny.
All right. Hey, it's a small world. Must be a good high school. So now you have this conversation with your high school buddy that's about both in school, and you say, okay, there's some good money to be made in the clothing and apparel and kind of customization and doing those custom prints and those type of things. You decide, okay, we'd rather be partners and go in together as opposed to competitors, and it'll probably work out better for both of you. So how did you get that going? How did you, first of all, because you guys were at two different locations, is that right? You weren't at the same university. So how did you remotely work together? And this was in the days before Zoom and meetings were cool, and before everybody is doing it remote. But how did you set up the business? How did you get that going? How did you grow it? And how did you coordinate in the midst of also doing your classes for school?
Yeah. So it's definitely, we had to prioritize certain things. At this point in my academic career, I was still in computer engineering. I just started a co-op at Lockheed Martin and was starting UParel. So it was definitely a lot on my plate at once, and I had to make some difficult decisions to prioritize some things over others. But the partnership was really natural. He took over a lot of the aesthetics and marketing kind of things. I'm terrible at making things look good, but I like to think I'm pretty decent at the whole operations side of things. So we really just, got together a bunch of contacts, whether it was reaching out on Instagram or getting their phone number and giving them a call, reaching out to different fraternities and sororities and saying, hey, we know you guys get your apparel from XYZ company. We'd love to give you a cheaper price, and here's how our experience can be a little bit better. So it's a super scrappy back and forth, just trying to grow the business. And we were able to do that for a couple of years, and it was growing, slowly but surely. But that's kind of our strategy there.
So you touched on it lightly, but I'll dive into maybe just a bit deeper, because you talk about the balance, and it sounds like you had a lot going on with internships and schools and running a business. So how did you make that, because you only have so many hours in the day, you only have so much ability to get anything done. When push came to shove, did the startup take precedent? Did school take precedent? An internship take precedent? Or how did you decide where was the biggest bang that you wanted, or if you had to do something, how to get things done?
Yeah. So the way that hierarchy kind of laid out was UParel took highest, because I think we really started to see the vision of where it could go, just looking at the apparel side. The internship was second, and then school definitely took a back seat. At this point, I switched majors from engineering over to business, not because I disliked engineering, but because for me, I saw that an engineering degree definitely required a lot more time than I was willing to give it. So I made that switch, and still try to do some engineering projects on the side to keep at least kind of up to date. But UPro definitely took the priority there, and unfortunately with school, and I knew this was definitely a risk that I was willing to take. With school, the GPA absolutely tanked, and I was at Lockheed Martin, and that co-op has a minimum GPA. I fell below that GPA, and after about 2 years there, had to leave that co-op, which was definitely a down couple of weeks. But I really tried to make that a motivating factor. I'm super petty with that kind of stuff. I framed that that letter that they gave me, and I keep it there. And really for me, I think that's where it really grew, almost a disdainment for at least my academic experience. I felt I was learning so much more going through, whether it was traveling to Mexico with UParel and finding other manufacturers, or at Lockheed Martin and really getting some hands-on experience. I really fell in love with that practical experience, and for better or for worse, grew a bit of a separation or disdainment for academics.
Yeah, and I think that there's that balance on both sides. I mean, on the one hand, I've got 4 degrees, which my wife always says is 3 degrees too many. So I've certainly gone through the academic, and yet I've also gone through the startup and building a business. And there's definitely a bit of a disconnect, I think, in between the academic versus the real world of the business. And I think you can garner knowledge and information from both, but
Absolutely.
certainly just, I did an MBA, which is, Master's of Business and Administration. Certainly, first of all, I would agree that that's between my engineering degree and the MBA. The MBA was certainly easier. I always joke with my wife that I only felt like engineering, every class was hard. Every class you had to put in a lot of effort. When I went to MBA school, I'm like, oh, there's about 50% that I actually learned stuff, and 50% that you can just kind of make up fluffy stuff and everybody feels good and you move on. But no, so I think that, my personal opinion is, I think you encourage people, if to the degree you can, to balance both, right? In the sense that, degree, even if, some people say it's the paper, but it is a bit of a fallback, that if a startup ever doesn't work out, you do have some recourse. And yeah, on the other hand, if all you do is rely on, you always stay in the educational world, you'll never get that real world or practical experience. So I think there's certainly that balance of both. So now, as
Definitely.
you start to put the time, attention, and focus on the, the technology, the business, the, up apparel, and do all of that. And as you're building it, so I assume that you, even with the lower GPA, you did finish the degree, or did you end up dropping out like some of the other greats?
Actually, still looking to finish next spring, so I'm on the edge of finishing things up.
All right, so you're finishing things up. Whatever the GPA, and we won't ask you what the GPA is, but for whatever the GPA is, you got you're going to finish that up in the spring. Now, as you're looking to graduate, and the business is on the uptick, it's doing well, you're getting that kind of real world education and all of that as you go along with it. Kind of how has the growth been as you've put that more of that time, tension, and focus on it? Is it been, upward growth? Has it been bumpy? Has it been a downward with COVID? Or how have you guys kind of adjusted as you kind of, or kind of put that as a primary focus of everything?
I would say bump. Just when we were selling apparel, we were definitely on a steady of just slowly growing the business. But we actually, just before COVID, I would say about Q3, Q4 of 2019, we made the decision of, okay, we can continue to grow a small business and have a small business for however many years we want to have it, or we can make that big, leap of faith and really focus on building out this tech for other manufacturers in the space. And so we kind of took 3 steps back so that we could eventually take a bunch of steps forward. So that was definitely a hectic, chaotic time. But now that we've built out a product beta, we've recently built a partnership with a capital firm, the Dorm Room. We have a lot of mentors that have really helped us get to where we are now, and we see the next couple of months even being super eventful in a really good way.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And as you're doing that, you touched on just a little bit of kind of now pivoting from what would be the apparel side. Not that you're not still doing apparel, but to more focus on the technology and the licensing and doing it for other apparel providers and all of that. Was that, how did you go through and make that decision, or come to that realization that, hey, kind of to your point, hey, we can stay a small player, we can still do the apparel, and we can maybe have a decent business, or we can kind of roll the dice a little bit, see if the technology, if we can't build out, really do something different, get licensing going, and really make a bit much bigger play for that? How did you weigh those options, or how did you, I guess, first come to that realization that you could have those 2 different paths, and then how did you weigh those options?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, again, is a very natural progression. I think we saw the success in the apparel side of the business because of the technology that we're implementing, and helping the customers experience, streamlining our internal operations, that sort of thing. And then we constantly, every order, we'd work with another manufacturer as well, and we saw that some of these manufacturers were doing a hell of a lot more sales than we were, but their technology was pre 1990s. They were using a whiteboard to manage $8 million worth of orders, or they were using an old restaurant industry pre COVID. It was, hey, we don't sell online. It's not part of our business model. We don't deliver. COVID hit, and absolutely everyone's on Uber Eats, DoorDash, that sort of thing. The same thing with where it was, hey, come on into the store, we'll show you different fabrics and we'll figure out something that we can customize for you. And now that that's not as accessible, it's everyone's scrambling to find a way to, modernize and bring their business online. And that's what we're trying to help those manufacturers and distributors sizes accomplish.
No, and I think that makes complete sense. I think that, and I always, as I've been both doing this podcast and talking to lots of different startups, as well as been a guest on a few others, is, whenever you have a change in the marketplace, I think it presents opportunity. And not saying that, hey, you'd wish COVID on anybody, or,
Of
the
course.
difference in that, but you're saying, hey, I think it presents chinks in the armor, or things that people could have been doing better that they haven't, because the way they've been doing it has worked for a long enough period of time, and it kind of works well enough, and it gets the job done. And so you never really look for, how can we make this better, how can we improve. And yet then when you have a change, or something that forces a change in the marketplace, in this case COVID, where you can't have people come in as much, you don't sit down and one-on-one design it with them and sketch it out and have those face-to-face meetings, and you're relying more on, okay, now how can we do this remotely, how can we do this differently, how can we adjust what we're doing. It presents the opportunities for those that are looking to say, okay, there's been a change, it's been that adjustment there, we have to do things differently, what can we do. And I think the ones that prepare better, either prepare and anticipate that, before the event happens, or as things roll out, make those quick and those adjustments, are the ones that are able to thrive and survive. So certainly see the wisdom in that. So now, we've touched on it a bit back and forth, but if you were to now take where you guys are at today, kind of pivoting over to that technology company, putting a license, or putting a focus on licensing and bringing the tools to other people, where do you see the next 6 to 12 months going for you?
I think it's just a matter of continue to bring on these early adopters, and listen to the customer. That's one thing that we've kind of had at the forefront of everything that we do. Is yes, we have a unique insight because we used to be our current customer. Still super have conversations, the adopters, and say, okay, what are you liking, what are you not liking, and how can we improve on it? And continue to improve that product beta. And we've also recently brought on some technical talent that's helping us build out the first real version 1 of the platform, and we're hoping to have that Q1 of next year. So that's another component that's super exciting, and just making sure that we're continuing to build the product, bring on these early adopters, and listen to the customers along the way.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, I would always say, one thing I've learned, I don't know the hard lessons you learn in business, but certainly lessons you learn is, it's never too early to get that customer feedback or that input, in the sense that you don't want to get so far along the path and, never have talked with customers, never actually shown them the features, and, just rely on your own input. It certainly is helpful, to have experience in the industry, and it gives you a leg up and where to start, but then to go out and start to engage with them and actually talk with them, I think gives you a much better leg up as to make the products that they'll actually use. Because the other thing I always think, and now I'm ranting just a bit, is, as you go along in that, too often you get enamored with all the cool features all the cool technology you could do, and, oh, we could do these 20 things and it'll be awesome. And then you build them out and only 5 of them are useful, or 3 of them are useful. And you spend all this time, money, and effort developing things, money of which nobody is actually going to pay for you, or pay you to use, or even want. And so it's always easier to go out, get that, as you're rolling out technology, get that feedback earlier on and often, in order to build that out. So now, as we shift towards the end of the podcast, or we're starting to reach towards the end of that, I always ask 2 questions, and so we'll jump to those. Now. So the first question I'll ask is, so within your journey, what's the worst business decision you've ever made, and what did you learn from it?
So, like I was saying in the beginning, I think the worst business decision that I made is actually a decision that I didn't make, and that decision was to bring on internal technical talent sooner rather than later. We outsourced everything from the beginning, and I think from a hindsight's 2020. I think if we would have been able to bring on that internal talent from a scalability perspective, we'd be much further ahead than we are now. Not to mention the operational inefficiencies that staying up till midnight to have a technical meeting, kind of come with. But that definitely is something that I regret, is not bringing on technical talent from the get go.
No, and I think that, there's always two things that are always hard. And I think that it's a good lesson to learn. And, I like the idea of, hey, some of the worst decisions or the indecisions or the decisions you didn't make, in the sense that those ones are oftentimes, you hold off on a decision or you don't make it, or, you push it out. And sometimes that can honestly make it worse, in the sense that you could have, had you made that decision earlier, had you made it more quickly, you could have actually had, a much better outcome. And kind of like you said, but if I were to justify now your position, it is hard, in the sense that you're always trying to, bootstrap it. You're trying to figure out, hey, we got more money, more things to spend money on than money to spend. How do we stretch a dollar? And yet, by that same definition, sometimes, you're penny wise and pound foolish, is the old saying. You look at the pennies and you're saving a few cents here or there, and yet it's handicapping the business, it's holding it back, or it's not allowing it to grow as quickly or as well as it could, because you're worried too much about the dollar, or the pennies instead of the dollar, so to speak. So I think that's a great, great something to learn from. So now, as we jump to the second question, which is, now if you were to if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup, just getting into a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
But my big thing in terms of advice is to just have people, like, just stop preparing. Start the business. It's not going to turn out the way that you want it to, almost certainly. Whether that means you need to make a small pivot, or the business wasn't meant to be, there's something that's not going to work out the way that you're expecting it to. So I think the important part is to just start, and you'll learn as you go and adapt as you go and pivot as you go. And I think that's really the most effective way to learn.
Hey, and the internet gods, they weren't much happier with their second question. So maybe they're saying, when you say it again a second time, will be even better. So that was great. No, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And, it's interesting because, we're now up over 100 episodes on the podcast. We've done quite a few. And almost indefinitely, I think that there's a lot of different answers we've got over the episodes. But I think probably the number one that, advice and or biggest or worst decision is just, kind of sometimes those go hand in hand, but people are saying, I wish I'd got started earlier. I wish I jumped in quicker. I wish I'd stopped making excuses, or I hadn't, tried to think of all the eventualities and what could go wrong and that, and just get started. Because, always a couple things. One is, you'll learn, some people quickly learn that they're not the entrepreneur they thought they were, or they don't like entrepreneurism. And sometimes they'll say, okay, I did that. I dived into it and I hated it. And now I at least got it out of my system, and I know that that's not for me. Or you'll dive in and you'll say, okay, this is a bad idea, but now we'll move on to the next idea. Or you'll jump in and, hey, it's a great idea and it was really worthwhile. And we, definitely glad that we jumped into it. And we, and to get those, all of the above, I think, are all motivating reasons to jump in earlier. At least test it out, try it out, see how it goes for you. And I think that more people will always regret they didn't get going earlier than people are going to say, oh, I'm glad I waited for, an extra 2 or 3 years, or I'm glad I held off. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody that said it was a great idea that I didn't get going earlier. So I think that that's a good takeaway that a lot of people have. Well, people are wanting to connect up with you. They're wanting to learn more. They're wanting to be an investor. They're wanting to license your technology. They want to be a customer. They want to be a client. They want to be your next best friend. Any or all of the above. What's the best way to connect up with you?
I think either LinkedIn or email. So just search me up, Carson Hunt, on LinkedIn, or send me an email, carson@uperil.co.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out to you, find out more about the technology you guys are creating, use it, how they can apply it if they're in the apparel industry, and also just find out more about your story of how you got, the business going while you're in school, and how you wrapping up with school and able to keep that launching and going, and what that experience was. So, well, thank you for coming on our podcast, Carson. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to come on and share your journey, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventivejourneyguest.com, apply to be on the podcast, and we always love to share your story. If you're a listener, go and make sure to click subscribe on whichever platform you listen to the podcast on, so that you can get notifications as all the awesome episodes come out. And last but not least, if you ever need help with patents or trademarks, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law, and we're always here to help. Thank you again, Carson, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode of The Inventive Journey, make sure to go and check out Startups Magazine. They're an awesome magazine and podcast centered over in the UK. And if the magazine is a digital and print magazine where they focus on tech startups and entrepreneurs, and they also have a focus on female founders and women in tech. So if you want to check out their magazine, either digital or print, it's Startups Magazine, startups with an S, magazine.co.uk. And you can also look up their podcast, which is called The Serial Entrepreneur. So go check them out. They're awesome, and definitely if you like this episode, you'll like them.